talk about the therapy implications of that later. But right now, you know what we're going to talk about?
What are we going to talk about?
So we've already talked about navigating the job market, because it is, as of recording this, it is January. We're about to start our semester, which means that the hiring season part 2 is about to start. And so we've talked about how to navigate that system, looking for postings. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when you get some interest and you get a Zoom call or a phone interview as kind of a first way into it. So on this episode of Not That Kind of Doctor, we're going to talk all about getting ready for that first bit of contact with the interview committee.
And for me, also the terrifying part, as somebody who's got to be on that call, as a young scholar, that was terrifying to me. I lost a lot of sleep over. At my time, I did my big job search straight out of school over 20 years ago. It was a phone interview, and that was one of the scariest things I can think about, because I couldn't see people, and because my first language is not English, so just worried, am I going to actually understand what they're saying, was a big, big worry for me. So that's really on the table as well.
So we're going to talk all about that in this episode. I'm Nick Hughesby. I'm an associate professor of elementary literacy education here at UNL.
I'm Guy Trainin. I'm a professor here at UNL, and I've been here for over 20 years. So I've seen a lot of junior faculty and a lot of graduate students that I've worked with, and a lot of the conversations we have is based on that experience.
So we're going to dive right in, because once you've started sending out your application materials to a variety of institutions and you've really targeted them, chances are you're going to get some traction around interest in who you are and what you do and what you could be doing at that particular institution. And normally the way that the overarching academic job market works is there's an initial review of those materials by the committee, and then they winnow it down to a smaller pool, and they do some kind of filtering interview. It's normally either a phone interview or a Zoom interview, so it's about 20-ish minutes, half an hour maybe, to give people a chance to talk through expanding some of the work that they've already done to get a bigger and better idea about who they are, what's going on, and what kind of fit might they be, right? And personally, I tend to think about these first conversations as exactly that. It's meant to be this filtering, what kind of fit might they be kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So it feels like they're interested in fairly general, like, who are you, why this institution, talk to us a little bit more about your teaching, talk to us a little bit more about your research, what kind of strategies do you have for collaboration? So those kinds of general questions.
And I think that it all goes back to that call that you answered. So there was an ad and there were a lot of details, and we talked about this, so if you haven't heard it, go back and talk about going on the academic job hunt, parts 1 and 2, because we talked about how do you read that. And really often this 20 to 30 minutes, besides getting a general sense, it's the opportunity for the committee to ask without asking directly about fit. So anything that isn't clear in your materials, and like, because I've had this. You sit as a committee and you're like, I think they've got this, but do they really? And this is an opportunity to ask that more directly. So you still have to think about that ad. And what were the things that maybe they are not clearly seeing in your materials that you want to highlight?
And I think that idea of what are the things that they might not be clearly seeing, it leads into something that when I'm coaching grad students for a phone interview or a Zoom interview, I always remind them that this is your opportunity not to reiterate what's already in your package. Like they have already read your application materials. This is a chance for you to expand upon them. And if they're asking questions that seem duplicative, like in your head, you're like, oh, I've already addressed that. Obviously you didn't, because they're asking that again. But this is your opportunity to build on that and build kind of the story around your materials and who you are as a teacher and a researcher within that particular space. So like, I know for me as someone who's been on search committees, the least effective initial interview is the one in which I learn nothing new about the candidate. You know, like part of, I think one of the most important things that any candidate can do is build a story around who they are and think about how you're connecting with the people on that search committee. Because essentially you're looking for someone to fight to keep you in the pool, really is how that's working. So you're looking to really establish reasons to move you on to that next phase.
And for me, and this is a refrain I have often about lots of ways we interact in academia, but you want to, this is the opportunity to talk about examples and excerpts, for example, from a study you've done or from your dissertation study, whatever you have going on that is relevant to this. But tell a story. Tell a very specific story. So an interaction with a child and what did it look like? Because we read those articles and they tend to be very general. They tend to be descriptive in that this is what we did with all of the kids. But telling a story about an interaction with a child or with a teacher or whatever the format it is, this is your opportunity to tell us that your research, if that's what we're talking about, or your teaching, if the question is about teaching, an example from teaching, but hyper-specific, contextualized, is really an opportunity to say, and I feel it in all of, I mean, the way I think about it is, I feel it in my bones. I live this. I'm not just describing general things, I'm actually doing the thing I'm talking about.
And that's a really important piece. Like you have to ground that story making. It's that frustrating and a adage of like show don't tell.
Yeah.
But this is your opportunity to do exactly that.
Yeah.
And also and a caution on the flip side of that, right? Too, because my other pet peeve when I am on a committee and we're doing these initial screening interviews is there's a finite amount of time.
Yes.
Right? So be aware of the fact that like any given committee is probably talking with 12 other folks. And so it's always a red flag for me when it's, oh, I don't watch my time.
Yes.
Like one of the things that, you know me.
Yes.
One of the things that I normally do on like a phone interview or a Zoom interview is I ask at the beginning, at the onset, even maybe in an email in the invite, how long do we have? How many questions are you asking? And I set my timer. I don't ask about like what the questions are, but I want to make sure that like I personally can get through all of the questions that they want to honor that committee's time. That's a demonstration of like my professionalism.
Yes, and I've seen people in that interview lose a lot of respect by answering for a really long time, forcing the committee to really tell them we need to move on to the next question. And my pet peeve, okay, if we're completely honest, is I know some people process the question while talking. There are good ways to do that, and sometimes it's effective, but if you've got a 20-minute phone interview, that is not the time to process by talking through the question. encourage, if this is your style, and I have no problem with that style, you have to do a lot more prep work, so that happens a little bit less, and you take a little bit more time to think maybe about the answer at the beginning of answering, and then have 2 or 3 points you want to deliver. Because if you meander, what we get at the end is you're a little bit unfocused, and you haven't thought about this problem really in an organized way. We're likely to ask things that are at least adjacent to what's on the ad. So we expect you to be ready, and that's part of that. That is, though, the scary part. For me, again, as I said at the top of the show, you're not seeing body language. Zoom is a little bit better, but Zoom is uneven. You can be asked for a Zoom, and then everybody's got their cameras turned off, so this is no added information. And that's not helping. But even so, all you're seeing is usually faces. And so you are not sure how people are responding, and that's really hard to read the room. And for us, especially as teachers, most of us are educators. Most of the people that are looking for a job in our area are educators. They've taught in higher ed, usually in K-12. We are used to reading the room, and suddenly there's no room to read, and that's really, really difficult. And that's why thinking about time is really important, because you can't read the impatience that you do if you're sitting in a room and you're like, it's time for me to shut up because everybody has moved on.
Right. And so I think that brings me to another tip that I personally find useful, but is kind of counterintuitive, is so you've done your prep. You know that there's going to be general questions that they're going to ask. Why this institution? What's your research agenda? How do you see it evolving? How do you teach students with diverse needs? Talk about your research and teaching, strategies for collaboration, courses you might teach. Those are pretty general questions. So once you have those kind of mapped out before you move into that Zoom or phone interview, after a question is asked, write that question down and really quickly jot down what your 3 big things that you want to talk about are, because I find that helps me
stay
focused. And that, along with my timer, I know I have this amount of time to talk about these 3 specific things that are really important to who I think I am as a teacher and a researcher, and I want to convey to that committee. And so it seems counterintuitive because you're quiet for a minute or 2 with each question, or maybe 30 seconds. It's probably not even a minute. But I feel like that results in me being able to respond more qualitatively than I would if I just went off the cuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It also allows me to track what all is in this question if I'm writing it down, to make sure that I've answered everything.
And my strategy is a little bit different, and that is I quickly write 3 points I want to make while I'm thinking. And I do pause for about 15 seconds or so. And I know for some people it's awkward. Maybe because I grew up in a different culture, I don't find that awkward. And so I just wait and write a few things down. And that allows you not just to stay focused, but it also allows you, when you get to the end of your 2-3 minutes for each question, probably not more, to go back, look at this quickly as you're summarizing and say, here are the 3 things or the 2 things that I really want you to take away from my answer. So even if you meandered a little bit, there's a way to pull everybody and give them a solid, this is what I really care about. But you've got to be ready for that. And you've got to really think about the strategy. And I want to add 2 more strategies really quickly. I don't know if it belongs here or not, but I think one is, as a non-English speaker, or if you have a disability, especially around hearing, and I have a few colleagues that are like that, and graduate students, I activate the closed captioning, and I tell the committee that I'm going to do that, because it asks whoever initiated it if they can. It is maybe 80% accurate, so sometimes it's really funky, especially talking about scholars or really long academic words that don't always get captioned correctly, but it is support that allows you to track a little bit better and gives you something else to focus on, especially, again, right now, I do phone interviews and I'm fine, but when I just came and I was 4 years in the United States, I was petrified by it. I don't know that I wasn't able to do it, but just the fear that I will miss something and misinterpret the question is really, really large. The second strategy, and that's a post-mortem almost, but post-interview kind of thing, and that is after that, debrief with somebody really quickly. Because you can learn. You're probably going to have more than one of that, and some of them are going to hit the mark and some of them not. But you want to debrief quickly to think before you lose what has happened during that interview. What are the things I can do better? Where are the things that I wasn't ready and I could have done better? What are the strategies that will help me do better next time? And I think that's critically important because when I was going out into the work world about 20, 25 years ago, phone interviews were kind of rare. There were no Zoom interviews. Now with Zoom, it's everybody go-to sort a mid-level. So in most of the searches more than 10, 15 years ago, we had a list of 3. Coming out of the pool with no intermediate often. And now it's almost ubiquitous that you have that middle group that has 9 to 12 candidates and you're choosing 3 out of those, which is usually what gets back to campus with a campus visit, which we're going to talk about it another time. So you're going to most likely have multiple of those and you want to learn from each and every one.
Right.
And deliberately learn, because there are things we learn just by doing and we're like, I'm never going to do that again, but you actually want to debrief.
Yes, and you want to have some kind of tracking if you're if you have multiple phone interviews, track kind of the questions that get asked, because they do fall into kind of these common piles, right? And so you can think through how you've differentiated for different universities, which is always helpful. But yeah, it's really a place for them to get a sense of you, what kind of colleague you would be, what kind of additional skills would you bring that aren't necessarily as elevated in the materials that you've submitted. But it's also this opportunity for you to get some information about the department itself. And that's one of the reasons why the time management piece is so important, because you want there to be time to ask some questions about that particular space, that particular university or college, and that particular faculty, right? So, and it's a bit like dating.
Yes,
right? Like
very much like dating.
This is like, you have your dating profile, and those are all your materials, and this is like the first meetup. So there are certain things that you want to avoid. Like you don't want to walk in being like, so how much do I make? That's essentially like, so hey, what's your retirement?
Yeah.
Like you don't say that on the first date. I mean,
probably not.
I
have not dated in a while.
Right.
But,
I mean, and when you date in your 40s, it's a little different because you are like, what's the situation? But that's not where this goes in this particular situation. It's thinking about like positive interactions, because again, you want to build up those like relationships.
Yep.
Even if they're I like to call them like skinny relationships. You want to ensure that you're having positive interactions. So thinking about like the department and ending on that quality note, I always like to, if there's a student on the call, and I normally ask when I'm invited via email, like, one, can you tell me how many questions, how long do we have, and who's going to be on the call? And I do a little bit of digging.
Yeah.
Who are they? Who are the faculty? Who is the student? Yada yada. And if I only have time for one question, I usually direct it to the student. And that's and that's specific, because normally the student is going to give me some really good information about how that department works, because they're not necessarily, they're of the department, but they're not faculty within the department.
Yeah.
And so it also recognizes that I'm aware of, as a candidate, the important role of that student on that committee, right? So like if I have time for one, that's normally where I go.
If they're there.
if they're there.
The other thing I want to grab that metaphor of a date, because that whole job search is like dating, and whether you're going to make a commitment or not. And you have to remember that the committee is also trying to accommodate you, and the message that the committee is going to send is about who we are, right? Who the committee and who the department is, and they want to attract you, because if they want you to want them. It's exactly the same thing as dating. I mean, sometimes it's like, I don't like you, you don't like me, we all go our separate ways. But their goal in that same interview is to find out a few things about you, but also to send that positive message. So ask the kind of questions that would invite that. And this is where you've got to think, and you've got to get some advice about how do you walk that line of, I know about you, but not cross that line to making assumptions about who I'm going to work with. And I've talked about this before, or that I can call it the cringy space, but it's really an intercultural space where at least we're talking about getting a job in the United States, and that is very different than other countries in the conversations you're going to have, in the kind of questions you're going to ask, and things that you can and can't discuss. And that is a really important piece that is not out there, and you want to find out about. So, for example, not asking about retirement, not necessarily discussing salary or anything like that. A, it's early. B, in American society, that's not something we put on the table. That's a secret negotiation, whereas in other countries, I come from Israel, for example. In Israel, there's a salary ranking that is published. Anybody can have access to it. It's the same for everybody, with few exceptions for private institutions, but most universities are public universities, and they have a scale. And everything goes on that scale, regardless of who you are, or how good you are, or how bad you are. So you can ask that question without it being out of place. And I know that, again, the way you interact and the language you use are very, very different across cultures. So if you do come from another culture, try to get as much experience as you can. Being in a committee is another one of those. As a student is another one of those. To hear that, get a lot of advice and do a little bit of practice so it doesn't register wrong. Obviously, the committee on the other side has to make allowances for that intercultural exchanges, but they don't always. I don't know that they always do, and so there's a lot of thinking that has to be about how you interact and how much you talk about. And again, you want to clearly communicate. I've looked up what you're doing. I know who this department is. I know where you are. I know what you're interested in and what the strengths are, at least based, and this is where it gets a little mushy, it's based on your website and based on a few of the profiles. This has gotten better over time, but you're still lagging. So people might be doing something else, and this is a way to ask a question. What else are you doing? Where is the department going is one of those questions, because that may not be visible on the department's website, for example, because it was last updated a year and a half ago, or whenever.
Right. And so as you're balancing out that kind of getting to know you like moment, right? Like you can ask about things around like, what do you enjoy about working in this department? Like what is it? What is that you want for? What sets your department culture apart from others? Where do you forecast the department heading in a year or so? Like, what's your vision statement? What are you working toward? What are your strategies and tactics to get there? And then, what do you enjoy most about teaching students in your particular department? Are all kind of generalized questions that I think end on a really good, positive note that allow you to get some information about kind of what you're walking into. And of course, like just like dating, like sometimes these things might not be true.
Yes. I mean,
right? Like there is the like, oh, we want you. So we're going to say what we need to in order to make that happen, right? We're trying to paint ourselves in the best light.
Yes.
And so sometimes there is a mismatch, but I find in was counting up how many phone interviews or Zoom interviews I've been on since graduating with my PhD, and it's like 28,
Oh,
which is a lot.
yes, it is.
I am old. We're not going to talk about it. And like, I could tell which departments I was like, nope, that's
Yeah.
not going to work. That's not going to work. And part of it is, I think there were a couple where there was literally like sniping at each other
Oh, wow. Yeah.
on the phone interview. And then others where like you hear like one faculty member would say one thing, another faculty member would say something else, and when you read between the lines and you infer, you get a sense that the dynamics aren't
Yeah.
great or
Productive.
delightful,
Yeah.
right? And that's there's a difference between reading. I'm fine with tension.
Yeah. Tension could be positive. I mean,
Right,
we are
like-
intellectuals.
Exactly. I'm fine with tension. I'm not fine with dysfunction.
That's hard, I think. I'm trying to think. If I'm a graduate student who's on the job market, I've been in graduate school for 3 or 4 years, maybe like some of our students, like I was, you come from a different setting. Reading that is really difficult.
So pay attention to like so having said that, here's what I think you need to pay attention to if you can. Pay attention to where there's slippage between how faculty members are addressing the questions that you're asking. Are there differences? How does that function? If you can pay attention to tone of voice, and you've got that, like that sometimes is helpful. Like these are the kind of like meta information that you can get from these phone conversations, because just as you're trying to make them want you, you're also trying to evaluate, like, is this a place where you could be successful?
Yeah.
And you're as the candidate, you only have a question or two to make that happen. So you have the quality of the answer to the question, but you also have the qualities of how the question's answered, if that makes sense. And that's a higher level of like analysis, keeping in mind that like language analysis is the whole bedrock of how I operate as a researcher. So that comes a little bit more naturally to me, I think.
Yeah.
But thinking about, I always look at how faculty are interacting with each other. I always look at, like I said, the slippage between how things are answered. I look at how faculty either build or fail to build on each other's responses. I look at how they include, if there's a student on the committee, how they include that student in that process. And I think those are things that can give you some indicators into, like, this is what we say we do, but this is how we actually do,
Yeah.
which
And
is
I-
interesting.
And I think that what's important in this context is, again, that idea of debriefing with somebody else, whether it's a mentor, another graduate student, whoever you've got around you who's being supportive and really is willing to listen. That's where that debriefing goes. Because I'll be honest, I have an enormous positive bias. I'm always happy about the people I meet.
You really are.
I'm always excited about what they can do. We just had a series of interviews, and I'm like, I want all of you. And I need to
And then
actually...
he meets me and I'm like,
Yeah. And so I actually need a time to step away and debrief about them and think about, okay, so I know I'm generally positive and I can see how we can support them and how can they be successful. But out of those 3 or 4 or 12 in the case of a phone interview, which are the ones who rise to the top and would actually be able to be successful without us investing an enormous amount of effort into making them so? And I really do believe we can help almost everybody. And who would be the best fit for who we are, right? So I have to kind of debrief back to who are we and what would be the best fit for us with our culture. And I've learned throughout the years that I've got to actually physically stop and debrief. Otherwise, I'm like, let's have them all, which is not helpful to them or to us, right? And can set people for not being successful, not necessarily because they're not going to be good scholars, but because we're the wrong place for them.
Right.
And there are institutions that are very, very different, and that's part of the thinking. So when you're on the other side and you're thinking, do I want to go there? I mean, there's that drive of, I need to get a job because I've got to feed my kids, or my cats, or my dogs, or myself, right? But there's the, can I be successful in this kind of place? It doesn't mean it's a bad place necessarily. It's just not the best fit for you. So that's also on the table.
Right, and I think that's important when thinking about the job market writ large. Is it's kind of this like secret, like, oh, who's going to this job? Like everyone actually knows.
Yeah.
Right, it's like just approaching it that way. And I was thinking about debriefs. One of my friends and I, we interviewed for the same jobs, and so after after every phone interview, we'd be like, oh my gosh, what was that question? Like, why did that happen?
Yeah.
Neither of us can go there, right?
Yeah.
So like, or, oh my gosh, that was amazing. I really loved how they responded to that. How did they respond to you when, so it's nice to have someone to compare notes with.
Yeah.
But that also feels kind of antithetical because here's why. Because the job market
It's finite.
is finite, and so therefore it's like competitive. I can't let you know. I could. No. Like, it's going, like, conversation is helpful, right?
And I do want to say the teacher education and education in general, higher education market is considerably, I don't want to say less competitive, but there are less candidates for each job than many other realms where there are 400, 500 candidates for each job. For us, at least where I've been, there are 30 or less for each job. There are actually relevant candidates. There might be more files, but most of them are not. If it's over 30, there's a good number of them that are not a good fit, or not even an approximate fit to the job. Whereas, for example, in history, in other realms, there are often hundreds of applicants. So your odds are pretty good in this job market, and that's why you can be and should be more selective. And we've had this conversation before, and I'm going to throw this in here, that in this job market, there's actually a decline in the number of doctoral students that are going out into the world. That's been going on for the past 5-6 years. Maybe some of it is connected to the pandemic, but I'm not sure. But it's definitely not a market that's saturated. So you're not as much in competition, I think. And the amount of learning and becoming wiser out of that debrief outweighs any competitive advantage you would have to keeping your questions to yourself or whatever it is that
So
you can imagine.
So we've been talking about, you've got this Zoom or phone interview, and we hope that this general kind of talk has been helpful in making that process a little bit more transparent. We'll have a list of some general questions, because we talked about some of them in the program notes. But as we're rolling on out, what's your like final piece of advice for people moving into a Zoom or phone interview?
Well, the balance. Don't freak out, especially the first few times. It'll be fine if you're prepared. So you've got to be prepared. And that's the balance. Don't freak out, but also don't be blasé about it. The fact that you sent your materials does not mean that you're ready for that interview. And your materials are great, but you've really got to do a most up-to-date, remind yourself who the department is, and do all of your research so you're not coming in blind, because the committee will immediately know if you have not bothered to find out anything about the institution and you don't know who is around the table and what are they interested in and what the institution is doing. That sends a very clear message. I'm not that interested, right? Going back to dating. It's like you want to know something about that person, but you don't want to get to the point where you're actually wearing yourself down. That's the balance.
And I think if I were to leave all you with one piece of advice is, you are the best person for that job.
Yes.
If you don't believe that, why did you apply, right? And I find that when I work with grad students, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's why full on camera, eyes, right here, you are the best person for that job, because that's the thing I have to coach around the most.
Yes.
I find that, oh, I just want them to have the person who's going to be best for that job. That's you!
At least when you're talking to them, it has to be you, because you're not getting that job if it's not you.
Right. So so just keep that mindset. Like in that moment, you are the Beyonce for that job, right?
All right.
So keep in mind when you have this initial interview that you want to be somewhat prepared, but you want to be flexible in your ability to answer those questions. You want to make sure you're collecting some information about who that faculty is. And you always want to be foregrounding the materials that you've already submitted, but building on that story to think about why you're the best person for that position. I think we're good.
We are good.
That feels like a lot.
It was a lot, but it's an important step because this is where we are narrowing down from 10 or 12 to 3. This is one of those thresholds where you actually have an input, a real input on what's being discussed with your personality, with your knowledge, with everything else. Up until that point, it's all paper, it's all materials. And they have to speak for you better or worse. But here, it's your voice.
You get to speak for you.
You get to speak for you. You can fix things. You can make things better or not so good.
So it's kind of like, may the odds be ever in your favor. But
Yes.
hopefully with some of these tips and tricks, you can shift some of those odds.
And that's not that kind of doctor for this time.
We got to work on that.